the Ramchal, Rabbi Luzzatto, explained that the objective of creation is for man to perfect himself. And if man perfects himself, so his state of perfection is due to his own initiative. And therefore, that is the value of the result, because when he's in the perfect state or in a complete state, he's able to be the beneficiary of the ultimate good, which is having a relationship with God. And he explained that if this is endowed upon a person, rather than coming back through his own initiative, it's not attributed to himself. And therefore, it's like a person is a beggar, and the beggar has nothing to do with the benefactor providing what he provides to him, other than putting out his hand and accepting what's given to him. It's not due to, he did not create the value of what he has. But if a person is a self-earner, and what he has, he rightfully has, because he created it, that itself has to do with himself. And we explained it, which something he's going to explain later, because the basis for every relationship is commonality, which I mentioned this many times. And if there's commonality, is compatibility. Just as God's state of perfection, which is on an absolute level, is not attributed to anybody but himself. So if a person's state of perfection, although it has no semblance of God's perfection, because God's perfection is absolute, and the human being is only relative to what his capacity is, nevertheless, there is a commonality, and because of that commonality, there could be a compatibility. As a result of that, the person becomes a full beneficiary of the goodness of God. This he will explain later. So now the intellect is continuing to explain to the soul what we're discussing. So the intellect says to the soul, with the introduction which I've explained to you, that man was created to perfect himself. So evidently, man was created deficient. We have deficiencies. And it's within our opportunity, in terms of our endowment, we have the means to address those deficiencies and take the steps and the initiatives to perfect and bring about perfection. He says, so now we have to reflect on what is chisoron. Chisoron means what is deficiency, and what is considered perfecting that deficiency. You know, a person is not adept in medicine. Is that a deficiency? You're not knowledgeable. It's not a deficiency. A person himself is illiterate, can't read, can't write. Is that a deficiency? Maybe since it's basic to the function of a person to be able to function within society, maybe that is. That's something you have to learn to become a more functional person. But learning medicine or learning physics or many areas or learning accounting, that doesn't make you a more functional person. But something which has to do with your function in terms of what you've achieved within yourself, but even being literate is only to make you more functional, but it's not the innate perfection of the person. So he goes to explain what exactly is deficiency. Within God's context of we have to address deficiency, what is deficiency? And what are the derivatives? What are the ramifications of being deficient? Not being at a level that we've achieved perfection. And how, through addressing our own deficiencies, as he said earlier, not only do we perfect ourselves, we perfect existence. And that's the ultimate objective, to perfect ourselves and perfect existence, creation. Now, how is that done? So the soul response when the intellect makes the statements, he says, no question, I have to understand what is perfection, and when is it considered you've succeeded? You know, many people feel I've done enough, I've achieved perfection, but what is perfection? To what degree? what is enough or what is not enough. Because if we understand what perfection is in the ultimate, then we understand what it means not to be perfect. Everybody has his own idea. I'll give you an example. The Gemara tells us that when you study Torah, the only way you're able to come upon its truth, only if you toil. And if you don't toil, God does not give you the endowment. You cannot come upon its truth. Because Torah, the concepts are spiritual concepts, and therefore, it's not within the capacity of the intellect, which is a physical faculty, to process spiritual concepts. So to come upon the truth of Torah, you have to be spiritualized. Now, to merit that, there's a prerequisite, you have to toil. And the Gemara tells us that Yogato Motzosa Tamim, if you toiled and you come upon its truth, you believe that person. If you did not toil and you came upon its truth, do not believe that person. Meaning, not that he's being dishonest. Although he believes he came upon the truth, and he's convinced he's come upon the truth, he did not come upon the truth. What if a person says, I've toiled and I did not come upon the truth? Still can't figure it out as much as I toiled. The answer is, you may have toiled, but you did not toil enough. Because if you would have toiled sufficiently, you would have come upon the truth. So everybody in his own mind believes, I've done enough. I think I'm perfect enough. For many reasons. Either because you don't know what perfection is, or even if you know what perfection is, we evaluate ourselves based on a bell curve. Relative to everyone else, you say, I'm endless miles ahead of everyone else. Therefore, I'm satisfied with this level of perfection. I don't have to do more than that. So now the soul says, let us understand what is the standard of perfection which God expects from us. And once we understand what perfection retroactively, we'll know exactly what we're lacking when we haven't yet achieved perfection. These are the words of Ramchal. So he says, the soul says to the intellect, because it's understood that if you achieve perfection, and God says that's what it's all about, then you know all the years previously of your initiatives, what exactly you were achieving, and how each initiative contributed to that ultimate perfection. There's an expression, ignorance is bliss. Ignorance is bliss. The person's ignorant. He's very happy. He thinks everything is okay. But unfortunately, since he doesn't understand what's required and what is knowledge and what it means to be knowledgeable, therefore, he's in a state of bliss. So that's what the soul is saying to the intellect after he's explained that the ultimate objective is perfection. To address our deficiencies, when we understand what perfection is, then in retrospect, we understand what is not being perfect, what is not perfection. So therefore, we first have to understand what is the ultimate achievement, and now we know exactly what to aim for and what to work for, and what kind of ladder are we climbing. You have two types of ladders. You have a ladder which is about 5 rungs. And you believe I only have to get to the top of that ladder, except you pass that ladder is for the cat to climb up. For a human being, that ladder is about 10,000 rungs. You're climbing the wrong ladder. When you get to rung 5, you think you're on top. That's not for you. You're supposed to be on the rung that has 1,000. The ladder has 1,000 rungs. So when you see the ladder that has 1,000 rungs, you understand you haven't succeeded until you've gone to 1,000 rungs. We have a visitor from Israel on right now, Norman Maggot. He's a cardiologist. Person, God forbid, has a cardiac event. So on his recovery, he has to go to a cardiac gym. So the person says, something, I have a treadmill at home. I can walk on it 5 minutes a day. I think that's enough. If you understand what it means to be rehabilitated and to be back in a safe place, the level of rehabilitation and exercise you have to do. You have to put in every day. It's not enough to walk on the treadmill. There are multiple things you have to do. But what does he know? The treadmill is good for a healthy person and a person maybe who's in pretty good shape. But a person who needs serious rehabilitation, same thing. Which ladder are we climbing? You climb a ladder, a 5-rung ladder. I'm on top of the ladder. A person's in a hole and he pulls himself out of the hole and he gets to the surface. I'm there. Something. You're beginning to see the light. Now that you see the light, now maybe you'll understand what life's all about. And now you have to take advantage of all the opportunities to achieve. And you have 120 years in front of you. Now that you're out of the hole after day one of the 120-year extent of life, what do you do for the next 120 years? Sit around and what? And fish at the creek. There's a lot more to do than doing that. You're going to play with your dog, take your dog to the vet. You have to earn money to pay for the whatever it is, for the neurologist for your dog. Is that what you need? Well, you realize pet food is a shortage. The premium, it's unbelievable what it costs today. I got to sit in my car, drive 8 hours a day to visit various locations, turn enough money to pay for that dog food. Okay? And that vacation, because after vacation, for all that I toil, you understand how absurd it is. So the soul says to the intellect, now I understand what the objective is. So now let's understand what perfection is. And once we understand what perfection is, in retrospect, we'll understand what it means not to be perfect and now work towards perfection. That's what the soul is saying to the intellect. You have a community, everybody's born, God forbid, with one arm. And even that one arm has 3 fingers on it. And there's a person in that community, he's born with one arm with 5 fingers. And he thinks, everybody else was born handicapped. He's not handicapped because he has 5 fingers. And he's more versatile than the others. All of a sudden, a person visits the community and he has 2 arms. And each arm has 5 fingers. They begin realizing that every one of them is handicapped. They're born with not as a full human being, but in their own context, they believed the man with the 5 fingers, he's the super perfect person. And even the person has 2 arms. What do you do with those 2 arms? Could you lift more than 5 pounds? Do you really have mechanical skills? What about if those fingers are arthritic? He can't maneuver his fingers. Can't do anything. Then the person realizes how limited he is. And when you see what it means, achievement, what it means functional, then you understand what you're not. That's what we're aiming at this point. The Midrash tells us that after 120 years, Adam nichre michuposo shel haveiro. What does that mean? The Chofetz Chaim writes that even if a person, let's say a person throughout his lifetime did not say Shema, did not do mitzvahs, did not do those things, and then he passes away, but he has enough merit to go to the world to come. But he has to be purged because he has certain deficiencies, things he did not do, which he should have done. Even after he arrives and he qualifies to enter into the world to come, but on his credit, on his record, he doesn't have Shema. He doesn't have matzah at the Seder. He doesn't have that he ate kosher. He doesn't have on his record that he kept Shabbos. You're admitted. And all of a sudden, you meet a buddy of yours up there that you went to the same elementary school and you came from the same background. And this other person, he's living in a mansion and you're living in some kind of hut in the world to come. So he said, what's going on? So this man, he invested his life and therefore he has from A to Z, endless times over. So each person, you only come to the realization of how you missed the boat when you come to that moment of truth. When you come to a context of seeing something on an absolute level, what the value of something is, and now it's too late. You can't achieve it any longer. Because once a person passes away, you cannot achieve those things any longer. All you can do is be purged and qualified to enter into the world to come. What level are you entering? You're entering at a very elementary level. The other person who took opportunity, as I said, life is opportunity, and he maximized on the opportunity, his level of accomplishment is another level of accomplishment. Because again, he is closer to what perfection is meant to be, even though he didn't achieve full perfection, which Moshe Rabbeinu achieved full perfection, but nevertheless, he's closer to perfection than you are. Therefore, when you realize that, literally, you're like singed. It's like you're taken aback. You're like shocked at that moment of truth. And then you have that true root awakening of what you didn't value when you should have valued it. And now it's too late to value it because it's after the game. That's what the Chofetz Chaim writes. The Chofetz Chaim in his work on Lashon Hara, the laws, what you're permitted to say, what not to say. So the introduction to that work, he writes, he shows how many, when a person speaks irresponsibly over time, and he doesn't know the laws, and he speaks negatively about other people, where it has no constructive value whatsoever, how many negative commandments over time could you be in violation of? And how many positive commandments do you violate? So, and he shows clearly that over time you will be violation, transgress 14 positive commandments, 17 negative commandments, which, as they say, it's a mouthful. God forbid. So unless you start studying the laws and know what is and what's not, it's inevitable. It's impossible not to transgress many of these areas, and you'll have, God forbid, all this violation, this transgression, 14 positive and 17 negative. So he writes over there, we read in Pirkei Avos that if you consider three things, you'll never come to sin. What are the three things? From where do you come? Where do you come? We all come from a putrid drop of semen. And where are you going? You're going into the dust, into the grave, a location of maggots and worms. And before who are you coming? You're coming before God to give a din v'cheshbon, to be judged. There should be a judgment, and there should be a calculation, a computation. There's a verdict, and then there's a computation. So the Vilna Gaon asks a question. Before the judge gives a verdict, there's a computation of the record. There's an audit of the record, and based on that audit, that's the basis for the verdict. But it says in Pirkei Avos, no, when you come before God, there's a verdict, and then there's a computation. It seems to be not in order. Sequentially, the computation precedes the verdict. That's the question of the Vilna Gaon. So the Chofetz Chaim cites the answer of the Vilna Gaon. He says something phenomenal. A person has an obligation to study Torah. And we say Talmud Torah keneged kulam. The innate value of one mitzvah, of one word of study of Torah, one word, it's the equivalent of all 613 commandments combined. That is the innate value of Torah. Let's say a person speaks Lashon Hara. A person is a gossiper, and he speaks negatively about other people. Let's say he speaks for half an hour about other people negatively. And every negative word which he says, he's violating a negative commandment. So that's obvious. So for that transgression, that you're culpable. It's culpability. That's the basis for the verdict. Okay? But there's a computation. At the time you spoke to Lashon Hara, the words you said that you shouldn't have said, you could have been studying Torah at that moment. How much Torah could have you studied during that half an hour when you gossiped? Let's say you could have studied 1,000 words. So not only are you accountable for speaking the negative, You're accountable for not taking the opportunity of the positive that was there in place. A person goes to work. A person has to earn a living. Why aren't you studying? I have to earn a living. Why are you sleeping? Because as a human being, you have to have sufficient amount to sleep. Why are you eating? You have to nourish your body. Why are you relaxing? Because a person has to take a break. That's all justified. Why are you not studying Torah? But if you have time to speak Lashon Hara, to gossip and speak negative of other people, why are you speaking negative? You're doing something wrong you shouldn't do. And evidently you have the time. So if you have the time, why aren't you studying Torah? So therefore, first there's a judgment on the wrong you did. And then there's a computation on that time that you did the wrong. Why weren't you doing the right? So as a result of that, if you make a calculation, let's say during that discussion, he could have studied 1,000 words, single words of Torah, not concepts, one word. You read 20 verses in the Torah, you could have a few hundred words or 100 words minimally. That's 100 times 613. So the computation is there's a claim against the person, and that's the verdict, and there's a computation. So what's life? Life's opportunity. So I pass on this for something else. So not only are you accountable for what you did wrong, you're accountable for what you did not do right, which you could have done right, which is part of the purpose that God gave you that opportunity. I'll give you an example. Person works for a firm and he has access to capital to invest. Not only does he not invest it to make profit for the company, he embezzles the money. And because of this lack of profit, the company is hurt. So not only is the claim against the man's a thief because he embezzled the money, but what about the profit he denied the company? And there's all kinds of fallout because the company was denied that profit. So there's a double claim against him. You did the wrong on two counts. You have no right to take the money. And what were you meant to do with that money? And it was given to you because you had the capacity to do that. So there's a double claim against that person, identically. That's din v'cheshbon. So we speak about achieving perfection. God gives us the means to achieve perfection, whatever perfection is. And only when you know perfection is, then you know what it means not to be perfect. So you have the means to achieve whatever perfection is. Not only did you not take advantage of the means to achieve perfection, you chose to transgress and cross lines, which brought about greater levels of deficiency. That is the claim. But if a person would appreciate and understand what opportunity is and what perfection is, in retrospect, now we know what to aim for. What is the meaning to achieve perfection? As mentioned, we discussed in the past, there's no Rechaim HaKodesh. We find that before the Great Flood, people lived 850 years, 920 years, whatever it is, 700, so many years. All of a sudden, after the Great Flood, the lifespan of human beings was similar to ours, 70, 80, 90. The patriarchs lived unusually long. 175, Avram, Avinu, Yitzchak, 180, Yaakov, 147. This was extremely out of the ordinary. The average person didn't live that long. Now, why was there all of a sudden this change in the natural lifespan of people? Pre-flood, 800 years was not considered unusual. Afterwards, 70 years is the lifespan. 80 is exceptional, as David Amelech says. Why? Why the change? She explained something interesting, and it has to do with what we're discussing now. He says, what is the objective of life? God endows a person with a soul, and the objective of life and the purpose is to perfect that soul. Based on the challenges which God presents in a person's lifetime, and you meet those challenges, though those successes bring about perfection of that soul. Okay? The dimension of the soul, but how many years does a person give, is a person endowed with? God can't give you an objective to perfect the soul that takes 800 years and give you a 70-year lifespan. It's impossible to achieve what it takes 800 years to achieve it in 70 years. So therefore, pre-flood, where the soul had this enormous value, and it was a mega soul, it took 800 years to perfect it. So every human being having endowed with a mega soul needed minimally 750, 800 years to achieve that level of perfection. God couldn't give anything less. What happens? When the goal, you're at day one of your life, and now looking ahead, you have 800 years, that's the deadline. When you have 800 years to play with, so eventually you forget about what it's all about. And you take your own path and your own direction in life. So because the deadline was too far from the beginning, people did not address what they were supposed to address, and they invested their lives wrongly. And as we read what the Great Flood was, every perversion, every abomination, bestiality, stealing, idolatry, human sacrifice, everything under the sun, they violated. Why? Because they were so off the cliff. By year 500, they didn't even know what world they were in. It's like a person, God forbid, he takes drugs and he's 35 years old. The man doesn't even know, he fried his brain with all these substances we allowed to go into his body. He destroyed his whole understanding of anything. He has no capacity any longer. That's what the great people pre-Great Flood did to themselves. So what did God do? God took that mega soul, which normally you needed 800 years to perfect, and he broke it into 15 pieces. And each soul only now needs 60 years to perfect, 75 years to perfect, no longer 800 years. As a result of that, when day one comes and you say, look, deadline is 70 years. Some people have an 80-year deadline, nothing more. As a result of that, the deadline being closer to the beginning, that will allow a cognizance for the person to understand that he has to address and be more responsible with his life. That was the reason why there was the shift from pre-Great Flood to post-Great Flood. This is the Orach Chaim HaKadosh. So again, before, even if they knew what perfection was, it was so far off, they were distracted, they never even neared what they were supposed to accomplish. They went south to the nth degree rather than even going to any degree in the right direction. So we have 70 years, 80 years, but yet, in our context, there's still an argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Was it best for man to be created or not best for man to create it? Here we have the deadline is so much closer. 60, 70 years. Person's 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old. The Chofetz Chaim explains, he says, one thing you can't understand, the Chofetz Chaim. Person is young. His chemistry is vibrant. It's overflowing. Person believes he's going to live forever. At the age of 15, 20, and what happens to others is not going to happen to him. Okay? Young person deludes himself. Person's reached already 60, 65. And he knows reality, the lifespan is not more than what? Then 75, 80, and even 90. At 90 already, you're barely functional. So if a person already sees the end not too far off, how does that not somehow touch a person's conscience and live responsibly and address what you should have addressed all the years prior? He says he can't understand it. But factually, that's exactly what the discussion of Beis Shammai Beis Hillel is. Was it best for man to be created or best for man not to be created? Because if you look at the end results, most people fail. They fail. And the consensus was after this argument, it was best for man not to be created. So now the question is, if it's best not, because if you look at the record of humanity, so how do you address the problem? So the Gemara says, the Talmud says, Yifashish b'maseh that before you do anything, since man is inclined not to do what he should be doing, before you act, it's like before you go through a minefield, recognizing it's a minefield, you just don't walk nonchalantly through that minefield because you understand that if you step on something which you shouldn't step on, your life ends at that moment. So before you do every action, you make an evaluation. Is this the right thing to do or not the right thing to do? And even if it's right, could I do it better? And if that is the lens through which you evaluate life, always making that evaluation, then you're going to succeed. It's only because people, we do things because we're inclined to do them. But if you say to any degree, you put the brakes on life, you don't act impulsively, even though it's not impulsive, but naturally, which is incline-wise. You know, it's interesting. If you ever think of it, the word inclination, a person's on a mountain and he's on an incline, and he's not careful the way he walks, what happens? He's on an incline, falls off he slips down to the bottom of the mountain. And if there's jagged rocks and whatever it is, he gets pretty much beaten up. He gets pummeled by the stones that he goes over. He gets his body lacerated. He breaks a few bones, or maybe he has worse injuries. So when you understand you're on that incline, you better be careful that you're standing securely, not to slip off the side of the mountain. We all have inclinations. You got it? Inclination. We're inclined. We're all on that incline. You know, they have mountains. I was never into mountain climbing. Maybe some of the people here were. There's a mountain called what? El Capitan. It's like you see the pictures. It's like a vertical wall. And these people, they're grappling. They put these iron spikes in and they grapple and they're going up a straight wall, straight up. They understand the seriousness that if they're not careful every moment, that when they put that iron spike into the side of the mountain is not secure and they hook something onto it, they understand they're falling off the side of that mountain. And every moment they climb that mountain, they understand that their life is literally, it's a question whether they're going to live or die. And because they appreciate every moment, there's a level of focus and cognizance of that moment. And one thing they want to do, get to the top of that mountain. And if they get to the top of the mountain, despite the fact that climbing a vertical wall, and what's the incline? The incline is straight down. But because they understand what the incline is, and they understand what it means to succeed, they're going for the top. That's the reality. But you want to know something? That's exactly what life's about. We're all on an incline. Some people's incline is more than others. But unless you somehow put that spike in really deep to keep your balance, and that's secured with studying and with doing many things, you have to strengthen your spiritual muscles, so to say. An average person, even if you can put it in, you can't climb that mountain. You have to be physically fit. There's endless years of physical training to be able to climb that mountain. Just as the physical, you have to have that training that you should be qualified to climb the mountain. In spirituality, you have to have that spiritual wherewithal, the spiritual muscles, the cognizant, the conditioning to be able to meet those challenges. No different, identical. Okay, Ron, ask the question again. Ron, ask the question again.
Mike, the question is there a difference in the way young people are taught as opposed to the way older people are taught?
Well, maybe I would ask the question this way. Is the difference the way you speak to people who have already experienced life, not up to older, younger, or people haven't yet experienced disappointments in life, understanding that life's not perfect. Older person realizes life is not necessarily a bowl of cherries, as we used to say. There are disappointments, there's successes, there's failings, many things. But understanding all that, we see life more maturely. A younger person who hasn't really tasted what life is really all about, what it means to meet certain painful moments, he thinks everything, as they used to say years ago, it's easy street. Things can go easy without difficulty. He teaches people differently. Now I'm going to talk about the more mature group. Many years ago, going back now, 35, 40 years ago, the prevalent question, at least in the educated group, the more educated group, as much as you try to teach them that there's a God and there's divine providence and there is consequences for our behavior, and therefore we have to assume a certain prescription of life, which is called Judaism, and behave and live within its context. So the question I would ask is, what about the Holocaust? If that's the case, there were so many devoutly righteous people who perished in the Holocaust. What about the million children, innocent children? They were murdered in the Holocaust. How do you answer that? So if you could have the best answer in the world, and you could explain all the aspects of Judaism, why that's the way to go. But if the person really wanted an escape clause, that was the escape clause. What about the Holocaust? Okay? A person who doesn't want an answer, you give him the best answer in the world. He's always going to find a reason to deflect whatever you say, because he doesn't really want. And you have to somehow convince him at a level that you shut off every avenue of escape, but there's no such thing. Everybody has a way to somehow to bypass the truth and to delude himself. So we're talking about a person who really wants to know. Even, let's say, middle of the road. How do you speak to that person? So many people ask me this question. What about the Holocaust? So there was a person many years ago, came to Yad Avram, and how did he become a semi-Baal Tshuva? He was working for a major real estate company, and he was a CPA, and he was middle echelon. And the company, the real estate person who owned the company, had some kind of reversals, and he fired the upper echelon because he was paying very large salaries. And he, being in the middle, he was left on top of the mountain. So he says to me, it's just unbelievable. It's like the top of the mountain falls away, and all of a sudden he realizes he's on top of the mountain. And he is given responsibility to make decisions in this real estate firm that has hundreds of millions of assets of real estate. And he's making major decisions. This person's father was a communist. He says, when I saw that, he had a little bit of a traditional background from his grandmother. He says, I saw it was the hand of God. Here, I'm in the middle echelon. All of a sudden, I'm a top player. I won't tell you about this person. So he says to me, so he would come every day, and he would come to lectures, and he was pretty much, he heard me say many things. And he says, Rabbi, I want to ask you a question. I've heard the answer given to you about the Holocaust, but I heard you give 8 different answers. Isn't there one answer? That's the question he asked me. But he says every answer he gave was a correct answer. But why don't you give the same answer every time? I said, when a person asks me a question, I have a sense, whether it's based on my experience of teaching, or I have a sense just of people, that when he asks the question, I have a sense of where that person's coming from. Not every person, they may ask the same question, but it's coming from a different place within that person. And if you have the sense where it's coming from, you have to address the basis for that question. Therefore, every person they asked, I had a sense it was coming from a different place. Therefore, my response is that, but can I explain why? It's just my sense of where that person's coming from. So therefore, when you, even the more mature group, before I start lecturing, even when Alan used to introduce me for the public lectures, whatever the subject matter was, I stood there for a moment and looked at the crowd. And although initially I had in my mind to speak about one aspect of that subject, I spoke about another aspect of it. Because my sense was that's what I have to speak about. Because that's what these people have to hear. And usually it was always on target. That's what it's all about. So therefore, that's even the more mature class. People already middle-aged, or people who are advanced in their careers. This group I was speaking about, people, they were in their 30s, successful people. But each one still has a different predilection, different sensitivities. And you have to say something which is acceptable and palatable to all of them. And when they come and ask me on a personal level, after Rabbi said that, I have another question. So that's already a detail in the general presentation. So then I have a sense of that person. Why is he asking that question? And I address that question individually. There was a certain person in Yad Avram, a very pure person. And he almost took on a zealot persona because he used to see things used to bother him. And he wanted to speak to people, to explain to them why they're doing the wrong thing, not in a zealous way. So I said to him, I said, you want to do Judaism a favor? Do less, don't do more. I said, if you want to drive people away from Judaism, you go out there and try to make Jews better Jews. You don't have what it takes. You just be a good Jew on your own. And you be offering a tremendous service to the Jewish people by keeping quiet, not saying a word. Because the way you do it, you have firstly, you don't have enough experience, you don't have enough knowledge, although you mean well, but meaning well doesn't mean you're going to succeed. Not only are you going to succeed, you're going to cause more damage than what you think you're bringing about.
Of course.
So the question is, so now if you don't have the wherewithal to be able to communicate that, so how do you do it? You're raising a teenage son. You have a married child or a person who's already mature in his 20s, 30s. You have a child and you want to give him some direction. So what do you do it? What do? You go and you consult to be advised how to do it. Explain it. So either you go to the person to consult and get direction and advice, or you can get advice enough to interest your child or the person you're speaking to be interested in meeting the person who can make the difference. Right? You have an internist. He's not the expert in specific fields, but the patient has enough faith in him, or he has enough credibility that if the doctor tells him he has a problem, you have to go see the specialist, he's going to see the specialist. Because at his level, he's credible enough that the patient understands if he suggests he go sees the specialist, it has to be checked out, he will check it out. It's the same thing. So the same thing. You'll say enough to that person, the person will appreciate what you're telling him makes sense. And therefore, making the recommendation to go speak to the person who has the ability to make the difference, the person may take you up on that suggestion.